Hello, and welcome to this latest episode of the Miramichi Historical Linkages podcast. I'm Sean McCarthy, joined once again by Sarah Ward and Tasha Smith, and our special guest, Gerard Picot, who is a historian and researcher, and we'll be very interested to hear what he has to say today about his research, especially in the Acadian community. Gerard, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, we're very glad to have you. So, Gerard, you and I are former Bulgarians. We spend a little bit of time on the island, and again doing a fair bit of research, each in our own way, and then sometimes working collaboratively. But I don't know that we've ever really kind of talked about maybe kind of the origins of your historical interest. So maybe we can kind of start there and talk a little bit about how you got involved in research and where your interest in history came from.
Absolutely. Yes, and thank you. Yes, we have sat together in many little dingy little halls and all that kind of stuff. And we did a wonderful project together that was viewed by about maybe 3 people. Summer 1685 was one of them. Yeah, you're a participant. Yeah, okay. Are you a guest? Okay. I think we had 3, maybe 4 people to see that. That represented 2 years of work. So it's just I'm so happy that I'm looking at your numbers here on your podcasts, and I see they're climbing and climbing. It's just great that it's kind of getting traction. So anyways, going back to Richard's question, and therefore you'll see that we do chase squirrels. So I guess it started early. I was it started when I was only young. So I guess the easiest way to class it is I'd lost my culture. I think that's probably the easiest way to identify it. And eventually I recaptured it, and to see the traditions and the beliefs and the history of it is it's just unbelievable how much history is there, and how it well links with Miramichi and the Miramichi area is one of the things that I never was expecting. So that's one of the things that got me very interested in all of what's gone on. The most I guess compelling thing to lead me down this route was the lineage of my maternal ancestor. My paternal ancestry is very interesting also, and I'll touch on that a little later on. But anyways, specifically, I'm a descendant of Alexis Landry. Alexis Landry is an Acadian who essentially is responsible for the shape of the Acadian Peninsula as we know it today. He is one of the founders of Caracat. His grandson is Simon, is actually the founder of Grand Anse, and so on and so on and so on. So there's a history that I knew little of, and going through and revisiting documents and going through archive works and clippings and all that kind of stuff. It's just been really thrilling. To rediscover my ancestry. And as I said, like I moved to St. John when I was 11 years old, and essentially my ancestry, my heritage, was a point of soreness. It was, at a time that there was very little patience for different cultures, and so that you kind of hide from it, and so it becomes something that and it's not like, I guess it's not like riding a bicycle. Like once you know it forever. You kind of lose it if you don't practice it. It's same like my maternal language. In 7 years that I was in St. John, I just lost my French, and so I went back and relearned my French. I went to a French trade school. I learned my French back from my brother-in-law, who's Swiss, and he comes from the French sector. So I speak French sometimes avec une petite bouche, as they say. So it's pretty interesting to see. A lot of people look at me and say, "You're not from around here, are you?" So I acquiesce and say, "Yeah, you're right." But yeah, that's and so noticed a lot of history. My brother was a theologian and a historian. My uncle, who was actually the dean of the Brunswick Teachers Association College for a while, Dr. Ernest Picot, really did the readapting of the history of our paternal family, the Picot side, and really that brought back a world of information, and also a lot of work done on my ancestry, my maternal ancestors, and the fact that my grandfather, who I never knew, passed away when I was 2 years old, was one of the preeminent builders of the Acadian Peninsula and Bathurst. So the community college up on top of College Hill, he was the what they called in that at that point the contremaître. So he essentially took his walking orders from Monseigneur Le Bastard, who was the architect of all those and beautiful churches and buildings. And there's over 40 structures, homes, private homes in Bathurst that were built by Jean Baptiste, who, as I said, was great grandson of Alexis. And so, anyway, so that gives you a little bit of a background on my history and what really brought me back to it. After moving here, finding out a lot of these things. And then I end up being the caretaker of the monument site at Wilson's Point. And unknown to me at that time, I mean, if I listened to Rachel, I would have known. But unknown to me at that time was that, we were doing maintenance. My son was there helping me, on a weekend. We were doing some, grounds maintenance. And then to find out that he has ancestors, that he might even be walking on the same ground as those ancestors, that were some of them survived the Grand Dérangement. And tragically, 4 or 5 of them didn't. They're buried somewhere at Wilson's Point. We still don't know exactly where that site is. So, anyways, so that kind of gives you a little chill down your back when that you finally figure that out, and how tight the circle is, as it were. So I don't know if that explains a little bit of my background. Anything else, Sean? Or are we done?
No. You're not gonna get off that quite that easily, Gerard. But
okay.
But we certainly appreciate that. Yeah. So I think each of us here is at least a little bit, and maybe more than a little bit, familiar with that rediscovery process that is at once, kind of in its broadest sense, but also in that personal sense as well. And what has that meant to you, Gerard, to be able to kind of reconnect, not only kind of with the culture broadly, but maybe with your own past and your own ancestors in those ways?
Well, I think rediscovering one's history is really a good method of anchoring yourself. It kind of, I mean, the old adage is if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. I guess the connectiveness with my ancestry and the connectiveness with what had gone on, and the fact that it's one way or the other. It's water under the bridge, and or you can't get it back. You tend to kind of get really emotionally involved in it. It becomes sore point. But you can't dwell on that. Obviously, you have to you know learn your history and move forward and um, become better for it, I guess. And I guess part of the responsibility is to make sure that others know of that history, and hopefully we're have them realize this whole thing about today and about cancel culture is really interesting because essentially, we have, and I mean, I don't mean to get into race wars or any of that stressful um, subject. But anyways, the thing is that a lot of our history has been, and it's only through this learning and through this exploring that we're able to bring it back, and we're able to understand and to learn from that, and to move on in a more positive and to to say that that there's no room for racism, there's no room for hate, although we see it all over today. And so there's ways to and I'm not going to use the word because I had been assimilated, um, but I guess it's to learn from those mistakes and become better for it. I guess that's the my twist with I guess this whole thing. I had an incident um, at Wilson's Point where I'm talking about uh, our collective history, and one individual said, "Well, you want to erase their names, you want to erase their effigies, you want to," and no, that's not what it's about. But you also need to know that there are others involved, and it's just not that one point of view that needs to be written in the manuscripts, that are written in the history books. And I mean, there's so much history that's written from the victor's point of view, and unfortunately that's so skewed that it doesn't represent the actual um, the happenings, the sufferings, and the victories, and when I look at my ancestors, and I look at Alexis, who was in the Bay Fundy area in Olac, uh, one of the things that you really don't appreciate, you just attribute it to doom and gloom and all of this fighting. And they had a lucrative lifestyle. They had he was a merchant. He dealt with the fortress of Louisbourg. I mean, the king at that point said, look at the expenses I'm paying here at Louisbourg. The streets are paved with gold, for the expenses that were going on, and also the trading with New England and all of the colonies. And so, there's part of a history that you really don't appreciate. The other thing was to see how owing we are to Indigenous hosts. And that's what I will say, because a lot of the writings that I've discovered are represent Indigenous, especially of this area, with a high regard and a very, very respectful point of view. One of the things that you notice as you're digging back further, that you'll notice that the Indigenous of this area were known as the crossbearers. And so the Christians, as they came over here, post Columbian after looked at that and said, "Oh my God," essentially, but there's something there a bit more subtle than that. And so that's the Indigenous of this area were regarded as very, very, very fine people. So that's one of the things that I did get out of my research.
Your story sounds very familiar to Indigenous, but when you say about reconnecting and relearning your culture, because
Yes.
that sounds very familiar to people that have gone to residential school through colonization,
Oh,
So
good.
those rediscoverings are happening, and stories are being told that were not told in history books or textbooks or what we learn in classroom. And we're just finally
Yeah.
at the stage where we're starting to tell our stories as Indigenous people. So, and then the connection with the
Yeah, it's a start. It needs to be
Acadians.
heard.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, when I watched Tully's interview, I wasn't aware. And, I mean, I've sat down with quite a few, um, and, was regaled in the culture and regaled in the history and regaled in the practices, as it were. And, to see the beautiful nature of that. I mean, for me, it's anyways. It's more of a point for private discussion than it is for public. So, anyways, yeah, no, it's and I'll say one thing. I mean, your history is a beautiful one. My more recent researching has gone through the earlier where I mean, I've been watching a lot of. I don't know if you've heard of Graham Hancock. Graham Hancock has a series called oh yes, the Ancient Apocalypse, and then we go on to the geomorphology of Randall Carlson, and there's another one. His name is Antonio um, Zamora, that have been looking at, and a lot of this information deals with Miramichi. Um, Again, things that I was not aware of. Um, and the way the whole geological formations run through this area is just unbelievable. When you start looking at it and you look at the evidence through their eyes, it's pretty revealing. But to think that the indigenous culture were here thousands, and I mean thousands of years, after the the latest glacial maximum, and running into to these phases, it's pretty amazing. The amount of history and the fact that one of the interesting facts is that it was borne out that there was more population in North and South America and Central America than there was in Europe pre-Columbian. So how's that shake your tree? You know, that's unbelievable. When I first saw that statistics and appreciated for what it was, and how we're characterized as hunter gatherers, and all of this here. Oh my goodness, what a history that was lost.
Yeah, that's my
The
connection in South
the
America.
farming and yeah. Oh really? Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're from the south, right?
My grandfather's half Mexican, half Navajo,
Yeah.
so we have a history with South America.
Ah, okay. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. The I mean this and with the advent of lidar today, it's just unbelievable how much is coming out. The things that were essentially in plain sight that you didn't appreciate, and especially in this area. And I mean, one of the projects that I'm currently working with, I'm not directly. I guess I'm being used as a consultant when it comes to the Federation of Acadian Families and their work trying to discover this site of the communal grave site at Wilson's Point. It's when you start looking at lidar imaging, start appreciating things that just don't compute why these certain disturbances are there. And so you start going, okay, well, one of the interesting things I'm doing is I've started a dialogue with engineering company that might go in and corroborate some or disprove, which is just as well or just as good, certain theories that I have. And so we're hope that that's going to bear some fruit, and so on. There's a lot of misidentification in the history, the current history record that I think needs to be righted. We can see a lot of the early French. A lot of people identify that with the Grand Arrangement and the 7 Years' War. There was activity here hundreds of years before that. And I sent you a recent map that I'd found by Abraham Ortelius, who's from Belgium. He was lived in Antwerp in 1570. There's the date. Publishes a map of essentially the world as he knew it at the time. But lo and behold, there's a Camp d'Espérance in Miramichi Bay in 1570. That's 200 years pre Boisbert. So that's astounding. And I mean, through my research, I'd found where Cartier had spent some time in Miramichi Bay. And if you look at the renderings from Ortelius, you kind of appreciate the fact that it was a Cartier-centric map, because the Bay of Fundy doesn't exist, and Cartier never went into the Bay of Fundy. Samuel de Champlain, yes, 75 years later, and so far, but it looks like Cartier spent a little bit more time there. Is it possible that the Camp d'Espérance was named by Cartier? There's some interesting research, So, and this cartographer actually was a trader, dealt with antiquities and coins and all that. I looked him up a little bit. And, he seems to be bona fide and really some of the one's the first one to project or postulate continental drift. Also had Antarctica in his map, which is before that didn't exist, and it's marked down as Tierra del Fuego, which is the land of fire, right? So that's pretty interesting stuff too. But anyways, I'm digressing. So that's some of the, we speak about the little rabbit holes you kind of fall down into. There's one. Alice, how are you? Anyways, so is that so far off the topic that we need to be brought back?
No, I wouldn't say. I mean, if there's anybody here that's not familiar with rabbit holes, I don't know who they are, because I mean, we've all done it in our research, and certainly we'll do it, in the future as well.
Yeah.
And in a way, like I say,
can't pass it by.
Well, that's it. But I mean, sometimes those rabbit holes will lead us to things, that are of great value. Certainly.
Yeah, such as this here.
Yeah,
absolutely. Anyways, one of the things that kind of led me to look at, when we hear an original one, as I said, my ancestor Alexis spent about a year here. Lost 4 or 5 of his children. I'm still kind of like looking at the census records on that, and found that the early census putting him in Au Lac, in Beauséjour area, Beaubassin. He and his wife Marie Thériault, who was a widow, when he married her in 1743, she had 4 children that she had from this previous marriage, and Monsieur Cormier, and they were brought into the household, and went on from there. So they went forward and had 5 more, it looks like. And when the expulsion came from the Beaubassin area, it looks like Alexis was part of the defense fortress, which it was renamed Cumberland, but Beauséjour, 350 against 3,500 of the forces of Robert Monckton. So that didn't last long. They escaped from there. All of their possessions, their belongings, their livestock, their everything was burnt. And then chased back up into the Shediac area, into the Ruisseau of Malcontent. That's quite a name also. And then into eventually with apparently 800 others end up at the Camp d'Espérance, and promptly gets turned into a starvation prop on L'Île Saint-Jean, which was Prince Edward Island at the time, had failed. There was a huge windstorm that had gone through and flattened all the crops, and so they'd lost all of their corn and their wheat and whatever it was that they were trying to harvest. Had all been destroyed through nature and natural circumstance. And the hurriedly put together camp, as it were, and the provisions and all of that, the stores, got depleted pretty quickly. And so 4 of his children end up passing away to either disease or starvation that winter. And eventually the next year he makes his way up through Puckmouche and through to Carricket, and eventually settles there after a bunch of meandering. Ends up being involved in the 1761 census, where Duclavet, and that's an interesting story too, this whole Duclavet story, ended up in Miramichi, and he was supposedly the storeman for Boisbert, and was appointed by the king. And, in 1761, here he is, complete traitor, working for the British Crown, and takes a census. And then what's left of the peoples in that area, and after the last naval battles in Pointe-à-la-Croix, up in the Restigouche, he ends up going and taking a census of all the families who were left after these. And they all gather in Carricket, and here comes Roderick Mackenzie, and load them all up, and they're off to Macnab. And but the interesting thing is there's 157 of them that can't be brought on board because there's no room. So an Indigenous elder in chief is put in charge of them and say, "You guys stay here, we'll be back." And of course, they didn't stick around. So there's 157 that originally formed the Acadian Peninsula. And so Alexis ends up on the original land grants, which was I guess, seceded by the magistrate in Nipisiguit at that time, Mr. George Walker. And he ends up being quite a builder, and ends up being kind of like appointed a clergy, and builds a chapel, and builds a foundry and a shipbuilding, and builds ships that were sailed the ocean wide, end up in London, and so that's pretty interesting history. So I think some of that is kind of in my roots. I can feel that coursing through me when I'm in my shop doing my woodworking, and so on. So that's a very interesting story itself.
So before we close, then for this time, Gerard, maybe, like I say, you have mentioned that you are working on a couple of projects, and we know you mentioned the one that you're working on with one of our previous guests, Paul Savoie. Are there any other things that are kind of in the offing for you coming up?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. And as I say, irons in the fire. There's a lot of evidence that's here that I'm working on, and I kind of briefly mentioned working with this engineering company. to reestablish certain, I guess, historical renditions, drawings. The one I'm kind of referring to is the as the etching by Harvey Smith, who was embedded with Murray, came up the Miramichi River in 1758 and drafted a scene that was used by Ronnie Gilles Leblanc, saying a view of Miramichi. And in that view of Miramichi, we have a stone church, we have pastoral lands, we have paddocks, we have farmhouse, we have barns, and a lot of I guess historians have attributed that to Burnt Church. Unfortunately, if you look at the painting real closely, you'll notice that it's facing downriver, and on the right there's a bank. At Burnt Church, there's no bank on the right, which is one of the most telling things. The other things, there is a shale bluff that is almost in mid-ground from this painting. And so I've had an engineer look at that and then apply it to a mapping system. And they placed that, I guess that settlement, as it were, at French Fort Pauve. Now, the artist is cited as being at this specific area on the bluffs on the opposite, which I guess was called the French fort, which was the supposedly the site for where cannons were deployed during all of this going on. So I guess my question is like, if this was hastily set up and done in such a hurry, how do we have a stone church? How do we have all of this cultivated land? It just seems to be, you trace that back now to this whole thing of Cooney and him stating of Pierre Beaubert. Pierre Beaubert is a character that's kind of, it ends up through the research that groups and other groups and academics have done, is a ghost person, supposedly assigned to the Miramichi area in 1713 after the Treaty of Utrecht to be the magistrate of the Miramichi area. This is just post the Nicolas and Richard Denis de Fronsac era. And so, there's another story that's pretty interesting. Put him here, but Pierre Beaubert, which was, tentatively a plausible identifier for Beaubert's Island, because apparently his head office was on Beaubert's Island. This character cannot be found in the archives, in the records, and so ends up being like, okay, well, there's not. And then there's the Journal of Murray, because of the problems with pronouncing Bois Hébert, ends up saying Beaubert. So here he's there. There's that history, but there's a lot of workings in the Miramichi area that are really not known. You go, just take a drive to Pointe-à-Car. There's one little area there, little creek called Taylor Creek, and if you look on the banks of Taylor Creek, you see workings on the bank, and they're most definitely dikes, and that's the signature of the French. You also go through another area, and it's at Denison Creek. It's on the way to Vin. And you look at that area, and that area is polluted with dikes. And so it would be very nice to have some form of, empirical study go on there. And so those are kind of little projects that I'm working on, that I'm hoping would bring some credence to the fact that they weren't here for just 5 years. I've got accounts and renditions and all of that from later dates and from dates before, but I had done a PowerPoint presentation at one point, and I called that one Without a Trace. And so there seems to be a lot of activity during the late 17th century with the Denis, the partnership with Indigenous families there, and the possible, in quotation marks, the possibility that Richard Denis was wedded with Anne Parabago. There's some doubt there exactly what her name, but that's obviously a Christian name. And I mean, their firstborn is baptized at Jemseg. He's in the records as Jemseg. There is talk of an elder or a chief in the area at that time with the Denis. There's talk of that in that information discovered at the by Casguerin in the late 1800s, records from the bishop whose name shall not be mentioned because it's as long as my frickin' arm. But Saint Vallier, essentially, he ends up seeing this whole thing from a second pair of eyes, and it's pretty interesting to think that perhaps there is a link between the Denis of today at Eelground and the Denis of that time. So are the Denis of today relatives of the Denis of that era? So there's another interesting project too. So, to sit down and kind of work out some family trees, work on some DNA analysis there. So that's pretty interesting. So those are a couple of projects that I'm working on. Hopefully, I'm going to, keep plugging at it and see if I can grab some traction here or there, and elicit some help, and so on and so on.
Thank you very much for sharing those with us, Gerard. Any more questions or comments from my colleagues?
Not for me. He did so well explaining everything. I'm just kind of like still taking it all in. I wrote down so many notes, so I'm very excited.
Yeah. Well, anytime that you want to correspond, Tasha, you want to ask questions, feel free. I'd be glad, and I'd be glad to share. Obviously, I want to hear your histories and all that.
I'd love to exchange information. That'd be wonderful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you sound like somebody that can return for another podcast. You get so much information.
I did. Yeah. As I say, I'm going to flog this one once it comes out, so I'll see if I can get my views up, get you guys some more traction.
I appreciate that too.
But yeah. And as I say, I'm running. This will be put on a couple of different social media sites, and hopefully you'll get some traction there. But I was very pleased to see. I think it was a discussion. There's one that you got is over 300 right now, over 300 views. I looked at this morning. I think that was a discussion about giants, which is something else. Yeah. That's just stunningly interesting, and there's a lot of history there too. But
I got the giant in my kitchen.
But yeah, my son is 6'7", so we called him the Sasquatch. So he's often a giant in your kitchen, but he's got his own kitchen.
Well, with that, we'll certainly take this conversation off podcast, because it sounds like I say, there's quite a bit more conversations to be had between the four of us. And you never know, dear viewer, you may be seeing Gerard again, and that would be, like I say, it would be a great pleasure for us to host him once again, and it's been a great pleasure of ours to speak with you today. So we thank you once again, Gerard, for joining us. And we thank you out there for watching this episode, and we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks' time. So in the meantime and in the in-between time, take care of yourselves, and all the best.